Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Timey-Wimey Precon from the Universe's Beyond Doctor Who set, and its face commanders, the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $50 price point to an increased budget of $85 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content, and if you really like it, please consider supporting the channel directly either through Buy Me a Coffee or through our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out the ongoing 15k subscriber giveaway either on the card on this video or in the link in the description to enter for a chance to win a Bernard Ginger Sculptor Commander deck and to unlock sweet upgrades for it. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commanders and playstyle. Starting off with the 10th Doctor, he's a 3/5 Time Lord Doctor that costs 3 and is it that has the following 2 abilities. Firstly, whenever we attack, we exile cards off the top of our deck until we exile a non-land card, putting 3 time counters on it and granting it suspend if it doesn't have it already. And secondly, we can pay 7 at sorcery speed to time travel 3 times. Then his companion, Rose Tyler, is a 2/2 human that costs 1 and a white that has the following 2 abilities. Firstly, a passive that grants her +1/+1 for every time counter on her, and secondly, whenever she attacks, she gains a time counter for each suspended card we own and each other permanent we control with a time counter on it. Breaking down their core stats, the Doctor is sporting a decent-sized CMC with a low-power average toughness stat block for his cost, while Rose possesses a low-to-the-ground CMC with an average stat block for her cost, and their abilities, when combined, allow us to easily get more and more cards suspended to cheat them into play while powering up our capability to inflict huge amounts of commander damage. Taking a look at the Doctor's abilities first, his first ability is going to be the bread and butter of any build he helms, allowing us to pseudo-draw and cheat into play potentially any spell from our deck whenever at least one of our creatures attacks. Now granted, that spell will take at least 3 turns to come online, but considering we're spending no mana to cast it no matter how big it is, and even if we hit a spell that already has suspend, we'll still usually be getting it off suspend much faster than with its own effect, making it well worth the trade-off. This then synergizes very nicely with his second ability, which, while expensive and slow, is effectively 3 back-to-back proliferates that allow us to uptick and or downtick everything we have time counters on, enabling us to cast our suspended spells faster, or, in rarer instances, adding time counters to spells we'd rather keep suspended for longer or that actively want to have time counters on them to enable or improve their abilities. Cards like, for example, his partner, Rose Tyler, who becomes more and more powerful over time as we suspend cards and get permanents into play with time counters on them as she accumulates time counters herself every time she swings in, making her very dangerous alongside the Doctor as an ever-growing threat that we can drop early, takes advantage of our cheaper suspend spells to grow herself before our opponents can mount a proper defense, and, once the Doctor comes down, kicks into overdrive by proccing his effect before her own to grow even faster, easily enabling her to 2-shot our opponents with the raw amount of commander damage she's able to inflict after she gets going. So, as we can see based on their abilities, the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler are quite a potent pair of suspend/time counters matter commanders, working together to get cards passively suspended for value, then converting that value into commander damage while we wait for those spells to come off of suspend. And, to its credit, the core build does a decent job at reflecting that game plan, including a variety of suspend cards that we can use to empower Rose before the Doctor comes down, more ways outside of our commander to suspend our non-suspend spells at reduced costs or even sometimes for free, and additional ways to manipulate the time counters on our suspended spells and other permanents to take them up or down even more efficiently. That said, while this deck certainly has a decent amount of those elements out of the box, it can sometimes feel like it doesn't have quite enough to be as consistent as it could potentially be. So we'll be aiming to rectify that by adding in even more suspend spells to enable our commanders, alongside more ways to suspend our spells and to manipulate the time counters on said spells and other permanents to enable our primary game plan even more effectively. And then, once we refine the core deck's somewhat lackluster removal and ramp package, and add in some cast from exile payoffs to get us even more value as our suspend spells come off of suspend, we'll be left with a suspend heavy build that's more than capable of generating huge amounts of value, while inflicting equally large amounts of commander damage, making it more than worthy of arguably the best doctor in the Whoniverse. So let's hop out of the TARDIS, put on our finest 4 pinstripe suit, and bring a Satsuma in case we get peckish. The Time War is over now, and, as the last of the Time Lords, the Doctor can again travel time and space with his companions, free to see the new Earth after the old one exploded, getting in the way of the 2 Prime Ministers, and even fighting off Satan in space. And when a vacation from the action is needed, maybe they can visit a planet-sized library, vacation on the resort planet Midnight, or check out places like Pompeii before it's too late. But remember, wherever or whenever the Doctor goes, it's human nature that something will go wrong. Blink and you'll miss it like a runaway bride. As the universe isn't always a utopia, and enemies will always oppose the Doctor with tooth and claw. And if you listen close, the sound of drums are getting louder, and the end of time might be approaching. But rest assured, so long as the Doctor has his 2 beating hearts, you can count on him to keep fighting back until the journey's end. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's briefly go over the cards that made the cut from the core build. As we went over previously, since our commanders very much care about time counters to power up rows and remove counters via the Doctor, we'll of course be hanging on to as many sources of time counters from the main build as possible. Starting with the suspend creatures, dinosaurs on a spaceship, Jadoon enforcers, and Star Whale, all of which will be staying in as either gigantic beatsticks that provide additional upside in either the form of evasive bodies while they're suspended, or attack prevention or targeting protection when they come down, as well as ecstatic beauty and inspiring refrain, which are both decent sources of card advantage via the impulse draw and regular draw they provide respectively, with the latter being particularly good alongside the Doctor and our other sources of time counter manipulation to net us cards much faster than usual as it repeatedly comes off of suspend. Then on the flip side, we'll also be hanging on to some permanents that come into play with time counters via vanishing that will be using our time travel and other sources of time counter manipulation to keep on board for longer, such as 4 Nox and Crack in Time to provide us with passive card advantage and exile-based creature removal each additional turn they stick around, and Out of Time as a potentially indefinite way to remove our opponent's commanders along with the rest of their creature base from the game via phasing them out. And then to wrap up our time counter generating permanents, we'll be retaining Rotating Fireplace as a mana rock that gets better as we increase the time counters on it, on top of letting us time travel itself to do so, as foretold as a source of free spells that the Doctor and our other time counter manipulation sources can speed up considerably, Trenzalore Clock Tower as a time counter generating land that eventually turns into a time twister for us to reload our decks and hand with, and Rory Williams as essentially a 2-drop suspend creature with a decent stat block and keywords for his cost, though the real reason we're running him is because he fetches his partner when he comes down. More on her later. Then from there, to supplement our arsenal of time counter generating spells, we'll be running a handful of ways to suspend our non-suspend spells to join in on the action, with the second place the 11th Doctor as an on-damage way to do so with cards from our hand, on top of being able to grant himself and our smaller creatures evasion to more easily trigger their on-attack/on-damage effects, Sibylline Soothsayer doing so for a random CMC 3+ spell from our deck when it ETBs, abilities. And lastly, the Wedding of River Song and the Parting of Ways doing so as they draw us cards and while time traveling to get us access to those suspended cards faster, with the latter also serving as solid AoE artifact removal as well on its final chapter. And then with all our time counter generating and suspend granting cards out of the way, we'll be pivoting to cards that retain their spots by allowing us to manipulate those counters alongside our commanders, such as the underrated 9th Doctor, who gives us an additional untap step whenever he untaps to remove an additional counter off our suspended cards, Rory's better half, Amy Pond, who's fetchable by her husband and, at base, removes 2 time counters from suspended cards every time she gets in for damage, and a clock spinning as a potentially repeatable way for us to add or remove time counters off our suspended cards so long as we can afford its buyback. Then as some time travel flavored sources of time counter manipulation, we have Time Beetle as a non-damage repeatable source of time travel that also has built-in pseudo-evasion in the form of Skulk and 1 power to easily get in for damage, Wibbly Wobbly Timey-Wimey as a time traveling cantrip, and All of History All at Once has potentially multiple time travels thanks to Storm. That's a great way to cap off a string of spells that just came off of Suspend to cast even more of them or load up our permanents with more time counters. And then to cap off our Suspend spell enablers, we have a pair of legendary creatures that care about Suspend spells carrying over from the base build in the form of the Face of Bow and the War Doctor, the former allowing us to instantly get our Suspend spells into play by casting them from our hand for their Suspend cost to get us instant access to them if we need them, while the latter serves as an ever-growing source of exile-based removal and burn the more spells we suspend to help us deal with problematic creatures or to tear through our opponent's life totals. Now, with all our time counter and suspend cards covered, it's time to move on to the handful of evasion granting sources that carried over to make it easier for Rose to get in for damage with her ever-growing stat block, those being the new Sonic Screwdriver, which serves as a mana rock that can make her unblockable while also providing additional upside via its artifact untapping and scrying, and the classic Rogue's Passage as a land that can do the same that our opponents are going to have a much harder time getting rid of. Lightning Greaves will then also be staying in as a way for us to protect Rose and the Doctor from any targeted removal that comes their way, which is sure to happen once the former starts getting too big or the latter starts generating us too much value. And lastly, we have some cards that made it in despite not fitting into the primary game plan, mainly due to the utility they still bring to the table, such as Everybody Lives, which occasionally can just prevent the game from ending out of nowhere, even if we suspend it since we do have a few ways of removing time counters at instant speed, the 11th Hour as a way for us to tutor up the 9th or the 11th Doctor to our hands, both of which are solid game plan enablers themselves, and, on top of that, can effectively create a non-legendary version of the 10th Doctor to get us even more cards suspended and to power up Rose even further, the Pandorica as a slow but infuriating piece of removal we can use to imprison the biggest threat at the table by phasing it out, even our opponent's commanders, and redirect it to a new target as we see fit, and of course, the TARDIS, which is an evasive vehicle that can reliably get in for damage to proc the Doctor, and, on top of that, allows our spells to cascade, which has some synergy with our suspend payoffs that care about casting from exile. Then very quickly running down our ramp and mana lands, we'll be retaining the Mana Rock suite consisting of Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Talisman of Conviction, Talisman of Creativity, Mind Stone, and Thought Vessel to speed up and or fix our mana base, with the latter two providing additional utility via the cantrip and hand limit removal they provide, the Tricolor Land suite consisting of Command Tower, Mystic Monastery, and Path of Ancestry to give us reliable access to all our colors, Exotic Orchard as an untapped source of mana that we can usually tap for at least 2 of our colors off our opponent's lands, the much-awaited reprinted slow lands Deserted Beach, Storm-Carved Coast, and Sundown Pass, along with the reveal lands Frostboil Snarl, Furycalm Snarl, and Port Town, all of which are lands that give us access to 2 of our colors without typically sacrificing speed to do so, Glacial Fortress, Skycloud Expanse, and Prairie Stream as more dual lands that can come into play untapped for even more fixing, the Horizon lands Fiery Islet and Sunbaked Canyon as even more fixing that always comes into play untapped, and we can sacrifice to cantrip if we need the extra draw, Irrigated Farmland as a cycling duel that we can pitch if we draw into it in the late game for even more draw, the Scrylands Temple of Enlightenment, Temple of Epiphany, and a Temple of Triumph as slower duels that make up for their slow speed with their ETB Scry 1 to help smooth out our draws, and lastly, Evolving Wilds and Myriad Landscape as fixing and ramp respectively that help get basics out of our deck while doing so. And then for our retained utility lands, we'll be keeping the new Ominous Cemetery as some serviceable non-destruction removal from the land slot, Thespian Stage as a way for us to snag a copy of an opponent's land for ourselves to either fix our mana or to get access to the utility they provide, and War Room as a useful if somewhat painful source of draw that's nice to have access to just in case. And lastly, we'll be keeping the 3 plains, 3 islands, and 3 mountains included in the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 74 cards including basic lands that we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 26 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. To start off, we'll be adding some additional suspend spells to our build in order to empower Rose in the early game, and for the Doctor to manipulate the time counters on in the later game, by cutting some of the non-time counter related cards in the base build. For example, on the creature side of things, we'll be swapping out the ill-fitting Explore-focused Astrid Peth and a Jenny-generated Anomaly in favor of Deep-Sea Kraken and Aeon Chronicler, the former being a huge evasive beatstick that comes online very quickly as our opponents cast their spells to pile on the damage and proc the Doctor's Suspend effect, while the latter generates us passive card advantage as long as it remains suspended, which we can easily extend thanks to time travel, and whose stat block scales with our hand size if we need another big beatstick to crack in with. Then moving on to some sorcery suspend additions, we'll be trading out the far too gimmicky treasure generator RMS Titanic, the decent but somewhat awkward to use removal spell Fractured Identity, the solid but off-theme AoE removal spell Grasp of Fate, and the powerful but unsupported mass clone effect in this build due to our lack of creatures, Nanogene Conversion, to make room for the repeatable suspend spells Rousing Refrain, Arc Blade, Reality Strobe, and Chromatic Escape, all of which resuspend themselves upon cast, thereby indefinitely granting Rose with suspended cards to empower her and the Doctor with targets to tick down with his time travel, as well as serving as continual ways to proc all our suspend matter payoffs over and over again, all the while providing the build with repeated ramp, targeted removal, and attack prevention every time they come off suspend. And then to wrap up our new suspend spell additions, we'll be removing some of the excess board wipes included in the main build, namely Everything Comes to Dust, The Moment, and Coward and Killer, all of which are serviceable but the core build has too many of, so we can add in the suspend only spells Soul Talisman, Ancestral Vision, and Inevitable Betrayal, which are all decent in the early game to help empower Rose, and are still playable in the late game since both the Doctor and our other time counter manipulation sources can help get them off of suspend faster, allowing us to get the powerful ramp, draw, and creature theft they provide reliably at any stage of the game. Then, as our final new source of time counters that we'll be adding to the build, we'll be trading out Donna Noble, whose damage reflecting burn is solid but doesn't really have a chance to shine in this build, to make room for Chronozoa, whose built-in evasion is solid for triggering the Doctor suspend safely in the early to mid-game, and, in the late game, becomes an ever-multiplying problem for our opponents as it keeps exponentially copying itself every time the Doctor uses his time travel ×3 ability to completely take over the game. Then with all our naturally time counter producing spells covered, we'll be adding in one more way for us to suspend our non-suspend spells by cutting the much too artifact focused Idris Soul of the TARDIS, so we can slot in Joyra of the Gitu in her place, who gives us a very simple but effective way to suspend cards from our hand at 2 mana a pop to enable our commander and payoffs, while occasionally being even cheaper than suspending a card via its own suspend effect if it has one. Then switching gears from time counter generating cards and onto additional ways to manipulate those counters, we'll be cutting the odd emerge token generator at a foe's offering, and the decent but limited due to our build's low number of CMC 3 or less permanents Wilford Mont, in favor of Rift Elemental and Joyra's Time Bug, both of which provide us with dirt cheap and repeatable ways to modify the counters on our suspend cards, and even other permanents in the latter's case. The bit too legendary focused Impulse Draw Source and Wipe the Day of the Doctor being slotted out so we can slot in Fury Charm, which helps pad our small removal suite with its artifact removal, and in the event we don't need to pop back row, we can instead use it to take 2 time counters off a suspended card or to grant Rose Trample at instant speed to catch our opponents off guard. And lastly, the interesting but ultimately too slow Saga and Doctor oriented The Girl in the Fireplace, and the far too limited removal creature Atrax Warden both losing their spots to Paradox Haze and Sphinx of the Second Sun, both of which grant us an additional upkeep to tick down our suspended cards even faster, with the latter also being a solid evasive beatstick to crack in with and gets us an additional draw phase as well. Then with all our new time counter generating and manipulating additions covered, we'll proceed to adding in a few more payoffs to generate us value off of our spells as they come off suspend. As such, we'll be cutting the decent but out of place clone Flesh Duplicant in favor of Wild Magic Sorcerer, who turns the first spell we cast off of suspend each turn into 2 spells thanks to granting it Cascade. The 2 clue-focused Martha Jones losing her spot to Nalfeshni, who also nets us 2 for 1 value off of every spell that comes off suspend, this time by copying our non-creature spells or by creating temporary hasty clones of our creatures, while also being a big evasive beater on top of that. Kate Stewart being benched due to a relatively low number of permanents with time counters on them to enable her, so we'll be giving her spot to Mizik's Replica Rider, who gives us yet another way to copy and or clone our suspended spells for even more value and board presence on a decent sized evasive body. And, as our final payoff, we'll be sidelining Sally Sparrow's Flash Speed creature casting and flickering payoff so we can add in Keeper of Secrets in her place, who tacks on considerable burn to every spell that comes off of suspend, and is also a very solid attacker and blocker due to its high power and built-in first strike. Then moving on to some swaps we'll be making to improve our commander's survivability and to ensure that Rose can get in for damage reliably, we'll be cutting the OK evasion granting and protection source Psychic Paper for its strict upgrade Winged Boots, which costs the same, but whose ward is significantly better to protect against targeted removal, while it still provides evasion in the form of flying, and the evasion granting Run for Your Life losing its spot to the better evasion granting Whisper Silk Cloak, which is both a passive source of evasion granting as well as targeted removal protection in the form of Shroud, ensuring our commanders stay safe against our opponent's spot removal while they swing in. Then as one last piece of evasion granting, we'll be replacing the decent but slow card selection and eventual extra turn that Regenerations Restored provides with the Mana Rock Ebony Fly, which gives us another way to allow Rose to inflict commander damage reliably to our opponents with her increased bulk, while simultaneously bolstering our mana base to help us reach the Doctor's time travel ability that much faster. And then as our penultimate new additions to the build, we'll be refining our removal package by swapping out the terrible land Temple of the False God, and the very good but ultimately unnecessary draw source in this build, Wedding Ring, which would find a much better home in a mono-white build anyway, for the staple removal spells Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, giving our build one last bit of instant speed interaction of which it was sorely lacking previously. And then as our final swap, we'll be terraforming the Thrive Land Thriving Bluff into the Painland Shivan Reef to give us access to our 2 most common colors without having to sacrifice speed to do so. So, now that we've covered all 26 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 24 creatures including our commanders, 6 instants, 12 sorceries, 7 enchantments, 15 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 24 cards with suspend or that can accumulate time counters through other means, 5 cards that can grant suspend to non-suspend cards, 15 sources of time counter manipulation, 7 cards that care about cards coming off of suspend or being suspended, 6 cards that can grant our creatures evasion, and 4 sources of targeted removal protection, leaving us with plenty of ways to suspend our spells through either their own or other effects, a decent number of ways to take them up or down and to generate value off of them while they come off suspend, and a handful of ways to ensure that Rose can safely crack in for commander damage as she grows, while preventing our opponents from picking off either of our commanders throughout the course of the game. Then for general deck stats, we have 12 ramp sources, 13 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, giving us a pretty by-the-number spread of core stats without any outliers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 3 0-drops, 5 1-drops, 16 2-drops, 15 3-drops, 7 4-drops, 5 5-drops, 8 6-drops, 1 7-drop, 2 8-drops, 1 9-drop, and 1 10-drop, leaving us with a somewhat strange-looking mana curve that's actually much faster than it may initially appear, primarily due to a good number of our higher CMC spells being able to be suspended for a much lower cost, thereby allowing us to start powering up Rose in the early game, and then, once the Doctor comes down, enabling us to downtick them while uptaking Rose every time we time travel while suspending more and more spells, until our opponents are either crushed beneath our constant stream of suspended spells or by our gigantic companion. The final price of this build then comes out to be $84.96 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $50. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, for side grades, we can swap out Ebony Fly for Felwar Stone if we value having an untapped source of colored mana to speed up our mana base with over a slower rock that provides some evasion for our commander to more reliably get in for damage, and Chronozoa can be replaced with Wheel of Fate if we'd rather have another quote-unquote free suspend spell for us to cast early to empower Rose with and reload our hands, over having a source of self-replicating evasive board presence in the later game. Then for additional upgrades, we can trade out Arcblade for Passionate Archaeologist to convert even more of our suspend spells into burn as they come off suspend alongside Keeper of Secrets. Mindstone can be smelted down so we can put Mox Tantalite in its place, which serves as a more on-theme rock that taps for colored mana to help fix us as well. And lastly, if we want to get even more Doctor Who flavor into this build, we can replace Mizik's Replica Rider with the 12th Doctor as an alternative way for us to double up on all our suspended spells at no mana cost, provided of course we give our opponents a copy of them as well, ultimately making him a fun addition and not even that expensive, unless of course we spring for his showcase art, or, if we really don't like our wallets, the serial number version, which I'm sure number 12 will set the buyer back a few $1,000s at least. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, now that the Timey-Wimey Precon's been covered, it's time to give the Doctor Who villains their chance to shine, with the Masters of Evil being the next Precon upgrade we'll be covering, along with its face commander, Davros Dalek Creator. So look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime though, be sure to check out our currently ongoing, at the time of posting this, 15k subscriber giveaway, where we'll be raffling off a full commander deck being helmed by Bernard Ginger Sculptor built by yours truly, and, as is tradition, giving you the opportunity to unlock some sweet upgrades for it depending on how many new subscribers the channel gets and how many likes the video gets before the drawing on November 15th. So either click on the card in this video or on the link in the description to go to the video where you can sign up for your chance to win. And, again, thank you all for your support for having helped the channel reach this milestone, as we wouldn't have gotten here without all of your support. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to keep me caffeinated via buying me a coffee at the link in the description, or alternatively, use our Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you're looking to purchase sealed MTG product, accessories, board games, or any of their other wide selection of products at low prices that include free shipping for orders over $75, and a rewards program that builds up store credit over time as you make your purchases. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.